This is our not-so-local climbing area, the Niagara Glen. Just like the way the Niagara River carved this garden of rock from the land above, it has made its mark on me, especially this past year. Down through the hiking paths that meander through the Carolinian forest lies countless boulders, but there's one in particular that sparked my attention. Before we get to the problems that scatter across its face, let's rewind and give context to why this place means so much, and the story that led me to this boulder. The path that led me here wasn't a school trip or a hike as a Cub Scout or anything like that, but through climbing at a gym as an adult, milking the last year of my 20s. So I guess I'm a bit of a late bloomer. Just like anyone coming from a gym, I spent my first handful of visits struggling up classic Glen V1 to 3s, muttering things like, how the hell can this be a V1? If you climb here, you know what I'm talking about. My visits were random and without focus, but it was definitely fun. As time marched on, I started to find myself trying a wider range of problems. The season before last, I slowly climbed up the V-grade ladder, climbing harder problems and creeping further into the V4 and 5 range. Oddly enough, this V4 problem felt much harder than the two V5s I sent on the same boulder. This honestly just scared me. Rocks below, pretty tall and overhanging. With no knowledge of the holds at the top, I unintentionally cut feet, but the fear translated into rigor mortis-like lock-offs, and you can barely tell. So I rode that fear right over the top. This pretty cool line is called Ripple. I assume it gets its name from the rippled hold you start on.
That's where I'm going.
Beauty, come on.
That's it. You're going.
Ale, come on.
Yeah, come on, man.
Nice.
Yeah, brother. Yeah.
Moss City, yeah.
This trajectory pointed me towards Threesome, a V6 first put up by Sonny Trotter that was out of my league. The crimpy and yet kind of slopey holds definitely didn't suit my style and finger strength, or lack thereof. The feet felt awkward and seemed to kind of push me off the crimps when I tried to use them. This was one of the first times I deviated from the beta I saw everyone using and tried something else. Instead of riding the crimps straight up, I started thinking I could create enough pressure with an opposing foot to turn a slopey edge into a side pull and then throw the top of the feature, compressing and pulling tension between my hands. Basically, making the crimp crux a compression crux instead. So while this was still out of reach that year, I felt like I unlocked something. That leads us back to this boulder. One of the Georgia boulders, and actually the same boulder as Ripple. But this time, I was focused on a problem on the opposite side. Pica, FA'd by Daryl Porter, and named after a fine unit of measurement, which I can only assume is because it follows a crack feature made up of only crimps and pockets. I hopped on it a few different times, with several weeks or even months between attempts, and often late in the day, which did not lead to ascent. I walked away that year with two problems on my mind. Even though Pica was a grade lower than Threesome, something about it just drew me in, and it occupied the most space in my head as the season ended. 2020 was an interesting year for all of us, to say the least. Losing the ability to climb at the gym was an unexpected twist. Whether it was daily stress or other anxieties that come along with the human experience, climbing has been my outlet the past 5 years. To add to the pressure that everyone can relate to, some new hurdles materialized in front of us. Laura's an ICU nurse, and early into the pandemic, when supplies were being hastily implemented, she went into anaphylaxis, likely due to hazardous chemical exposure. We unfortunately won't ever know for sure, but it left her with hives covering her body from the top of her scalp to the bottom of her feet, and waking up with her eyes swelling shut, airways closing, and lips that not even plastic surgery could achieve. In all seriousness, it was scary, and the anaphylaxis lasted over several days, landing her in the ER 3 times, and residual reactions and sensitivity followed for weeks. In addition to that, at the same time, she was diagnosed with significant endometriosis that would require surgery. All that on top of dealing with everything that was coming into the hospital where she worked. Around this time, I had a very simple accident and noticed some discomfort in my abdomen. Things seemed out of place. It was a hernia. I suspect it's actually an injury that I've had for a while, maybe even years, that finally gave way when I hurt myself. Being cooped up indoors and all the stress of the world outside those doors, worrying about Laura and her job and our own problems, left me pretty devoid of energy. I just felt deflated. I actually consider myself introverted and fared okay through our first lockdown and voluntary isolation, but I did start to miss my friends. Stepping back into the Glen was a welcome change. Our first session, back outside in August, we met up with some friends and aimlessly picked a spot away from people. We parked our asses beside Ripple, yep, the same boulder as Pica, but in front of another problem. I touched the starting holds years before, but never tried it. Typical to the Dolomite boulders here, the holds were polished to a glassy finish and were always seeping. Our summers get extremely humid, so August is hardly the best month for climbing. But I was just there to have fun, spend some time with friends for the first time in months. So we gave it the old college try without any beta. For the first time in a long time, I felt energized, really happy in the moment, and I felt that channeled into my climbing. With relative ease, I sent this problem without any expectations. I was happy, enjoying the simple feeling of climbing movement, not hindered by my ailments, walking away feeling accomplished. This set the pace for my season outside. I decided to focus on enjoying myself and not feeling pressure to climb harder. Although I'd be lying if I said I wasn't still thinking about Pica, sitting, waiting, on the other side of that boulder. My trips became more frequent, and I didn't bring my camera along for a lot of the early visits, but I started to pretty quickly send a lot of problems. Like this V3 that had a super awkward sit start that I would have struggled on in the past, yet I on-sighted it. I quickly sent a decent amount of V3s and 4s I'd never tried before, a list longer than I could count on 2 hands. So it was time to try those hands at problems I'd failed on years before.
You ready?
No. This is the, it's gotta be one of the hardest V3s in the Glen, I'd say. I think if I can do the first move, I can climb it, but if not, I'll just fall on my butt 12, 13 times.
Right.
So.
Let's see it.
I mentioned in other videos that I think the grade isn't that important. It's what you get out of it. This was a prime example of that.
Come on.
There we go.
Come on.
Whoa.
Oh no.
I lied.
Ah,
I can do the first move
I
apparently.
thought you had it.
Can't do it. Too much grunting, not enough climbing. I hit these holds so bad. I like hit this one kind of like half on it. And I reached for this thing and I couldn't get my fingers in.
Yeah.
Probably better there. That felt pretty good though.
Yeah.
Round 2. No.
No.
See? One hit wonder. Got enough strength to do it once.
Come on. Oh.
Ah! I'm only hitting this like a finger
Yeah.
and a half. Like my middle finger's going in. My index finger is just like wrapping the edge. So I'm kind of like monoing it. I need to sink more fingers in there. Sorry, sorry to ruin your director's reel.
I'm a professional.
I know you are. Well, what am I?
An
amateur. That's the answer.
I mean, I could say a lot worse.
And you have. Alright.
Come on. Come on. You got it.
I guess the feet don't really matter here, but I suck to fall now. Yes! Finally.
Good job.
Yeah!
How you feel?
Pretty good, actually. It's like the grades don't really matter, but that feels like such a hard problem for me, so it feels so good to do it. Better than some other things I've climbed, so pretty stoked.
Time to crush beer?
Time to crush a beer. Let's go! Alright, this is the long-legged beta for Hector toe hook, Hector heel hook. Step number 1, eat a donut. I think you can start to see how being here affected me. I was having fun, I felt unburdened, and just more like myself. It's good.
Can you tell us about this donut?
So this is the praised vanilla dip donut. It is prize jewel of Canada.
Tell us about why you only like this type of vanilla dip donut.
Because it has the perfect blend of slimy, sugary icing and crunchiness.
But you don't like the other vanilla dip donuts.
No, because the other sprinkles are mushy. These are crunchy.
And tell them about how you get all pissed off when I give you a vanilla dip donut that isn't that one.
I get all pissed off, which gives me a vanilla dip donut that isn't this one.
Even though it's not my fault.
It is your
I just order it through the drive-thru. And then it's the wrong sprinkles. And I never live it down.
You should have walked in, asked them what kind of sprinkles you got. They're like, hey, we got the sprinkles, and you don't get that one for me. You just drive away. Forever. You know it's healthy because you can see the vibrant colors. I got my carbs. Time to send. This problem is called Hector toe hook. Surprise, surprise, the crux is a double toe hook, and my long legs meant that I had trouble putting tension through my toes without my ass sitting on the crash pad. So I scrapped that and used my heel instead, an awkward position many would avoid. It forced me into a posture where my pelvis couldn't dip. It meant I had to throw to a sloper to create space and tension for the heel, and then an intermediate hold to unwind into the double toe hook position. But it worked for me. So even though I jokingly call it Hector heel hook now, I technically still do the toes. After sending these problems I'd failed on before, I started to feel a shift. I felt a boost of confidence. Confidence is a weird word here. I feel like in this setting, it suggests a level of cockiness, but that wasn't it at all. I hadn't sent any problems that were attached to any huge number, but they were things I struggled with before, and it honestly felt good regardless. I started feeling comfortable in the process, learning lessons in failure, sending or not. It seemed clear that I had to take this newfound focus and energy and continue to carry that momentum into other problems on my incomplete list. And first on that list was Threesome. I thought I could put this down, but I was worried about the unknowns. I hadn't successfully executed my new beta, and I hadn't tried the top section. I tend to work on problems from the ground up, and only skip holds to work on a section if I've already used them. It's like setting a checkpoint in a game. I can't skip holds I haven't touched or controlled yet. I've been told that the top was straightforward, but it's fairly tall, and the final moves are directly over a rock. If not padded nicely and without spotters, it's not hard to maim yourself. I've personally witnessed more than one ankle sprain in this exact spot. Not exactly something you want on your mind, especially when my biggest struggle outdoors is my mental game. Well, one burn to test out the crash pads and spotters was enough to carry me to the top. My first session back on this boulder, and I sent my first V6 outside. I made a conscious decision to focus on positive energy and get out here as much as I could, which really only meant one day per weekend I had free. So when friends' schedules didn't align, I just showed up alone with 2 crash pads. Sometimes that meant just working things by myself, or other times I would safely tag along with people I met down there, which put me on problems I don't think I would have tried. And some of those went down pretty quick, including this V6. I just put my camera down to capture the beta for the next time, so I didn't check focus or framing or anything. But I sent it my second go from the start, so sorry about the blurry footage. Then I flashed this V6, which was a bit heady. It's hard to tell because my friend is in the foreground, on higher ground, and 6'4", but the boulder was tall and the landing steep, covered with jagged rocks. This might have been another boulder where fear helped me over the top. I was on a bit of a roll, and one day, aimlessly wandering alone, I ran into some guys set up on a classic V3 I'd climbed before, but figured I'd repeat. They kindly let me climb, and I thought I'd try the problem beside it too. This is Life O'Reilly, a problem I hadn't even bothered touching. It's just off a main path, and seeing the polished slopers and thin crimps at a distance was more than enough for me. But I had nowhere better to be, so I started pulling on. I'd be lying if I said it went down like the other problems, but after some random burns, 2 full day sessions, lots of skin and blood, I pulled over the top. I already felt like I'd made it to a turning point, but after this, I was ecstatic. I honestly never thought this was a problem that I could even touch. You might be thinking, alright, cool. But what about that boulder you hyped up earlier? The one with Pica? What happened to that? Well, yeah, clearly I hadn't forgotten about it, but it's a popular boulder right off a main path. In normal circumstances, it's busy, and I don't like climbing in front of crowds. With gyms closed, the Glen was swamped with traffic, and it was often swarming. With everything going on, it unfortunately meant it was over capacity for me. But I found a moment at the end of one day to give it a go. It was during the session that I realized the crux for me didn't feel much easier, even with all of my progress. I felt like there was something I was missing. A friend suggested using this high foot to move into the crux. With my long legs, the foot was just too high and spring-loaded my body, but he insisted I use it. Contrary to every bone and muscle in my body telling me the high foot wouldn't work, I was still going to try it. I don't mind being wrong if there's actually something I can learn from it. I actually embrace that. So I really did give it all my effort, and honestly, well, yeah, he was right and it worked first try. I finally sent this problem, which I kind of thought was my first real project. Out of everything I'd done to this point, regardless of the grade, this was the most gratifying. So with this problem put to bed, I guess it was time to find a new boulder with new problems to get lost in. But wait, what's that just around the corner? What's this problem? This V4 or 5, depending on who you talk to, was another one of those problems happily observed at a distance. Moving through difficult looking holds on polished feet, not only did this look way too hard for me, but it kind of just looked gnarly. But if I'd learned anything this year, it was to at least give it a try. These intimidating slopers are the start holds, but the more you try, the better they start to feel. You get familiarized with the minute features that you can exploit but eat your skin, like micro dimples and teeth. After them, you bump along to some crimps to create opposition so you don't slide off the angled feet void of texture. None of these positions you feel very stable in. You need consistent pressure through your feet on not so great holds and keep your hips from turning out, making it hard to just power through with finger or upper body strength alone. It was some technical climbing I wasn't expecting and different from a lot of problems I'd climbed. In a familiar time frame, on my second session working on it, everything just came together and it became one of my favorite problems. You might notice that the end of this problem is the start of Pica, and I did too, jokingly starting to climb into it. Well, that link up has a name: Energy Crisis. A fitting name for a problem with quite a few moves, first sent by Pete Samassi, I hope I'm saying his name right. The tricky, tense movements of Delicatessen to the Gaston press I do to the finish sets you up for an undercling rest position that starts Pica. Then you move around the corner to the crimp line with the crux section right at the end when you're the most tired. I decided this problem was long enough that I brought a chalk bag and tried to shake out and rest at the most comfortable position where both problems meet up. Basically pretending I'm a sport climber. And that didn't work out so well. This is a perfect example of how exhausting and heartbreaking this problem was for me. I realized that I don't know how to rest, or at least I don't get a lot out of it. This would take every drop of energy for me to pull it off, and I realized that I just needed to move through the whole problem as efficiently as I could and forget about resting. So after working the moves during 1 or 2 visits and several failed sessions from the start, I finally sent it, leaving the unused chalk bag on for good luck. My first V7 outdoors. Energy Crisis also suffers from the arbitrary grading issue, where it's labeled anywhere from a V6 to a V8. The guidebook I have says 7, climbers I trust use that grade, and it's the median number in the range I mentioned, but more importantly, it felt like the hardest problem I've climbed outdoors, and that grade seems solid. In the world of pro climbers, this grade might not be impressive. Strong climbers who sent this with relative ease might not think that much as they pass it on the way to other, harder boulders, but to climbers like me who have struggled through Pica, Delicatessen, and finally Energy Crisis, this boulder looks a lot different passing it into the Glen. For me, it meant something more. It was through this problem that I realized I hadn't really projected before. I foolishly used that word in the past on other problems that I failed on more than once. But those attempts were often separated by weeks or months for getting beta in poor conditions when tired, and the list goes on. This was true in Pica when I tried it before. I landed there at the end of the day when no one wanted to work on it, had to reset and remember my beta, and never refined it. I just stuck to the same moves and failed over and over again. Energy Crisis was my first project. A few short sessions on Delicatessen, the scattered attempts on Pica and parts of the link-up, and finally 2 sessions just working on the entire line. I can actually say I worked on this problem. I showed up and just focused on it, refined my beta, memorized the moves, and didn't leave massive gaps between attempts. Even with that said, for my hardest problem, I honestly don't think I worked it very long, and I did so with a pretty serious injury. I walked away realizing that I haven't really tried that hard to send things outside. That's not to say I haven't exerted myself on problems before, but I failed to focus on them and truly put my energy into the process. I've shifted my attention to finding proper challenges, things that I could fail on over and over again, but know that they are possible. If I actually focus on something that tests me, I wonder what problems are out there that I could find myself pulling over the top of. This was the year that drained my spirit. I felt tired, weak, and lacking my normal energy. My focus was fragmented, and I found myself in a headspace I'm sure all of you have been finding yourselves in too. For me, climbing is meditative, which I think is odd to non-climbers. But you're focused on the task in front of you, you're hyper-aware of your entire body, and the second you lose that focus, you're off. While climbing, I turn off anything that might be going on in my life. Some might see that as escapism, but I see it as therapy. I have trouble turning off my thoughts, but when I'm on the wall, I do just that. This place became a bit of a sanctuary for me, where I could be present, rekindle that sense of adventure that I've always had, and just be me. This problem I truly learned something from. I left the Glen physically exhausted, and yet mentally energized, and I plan to ride that energy into this season as I recover from surgery. In a time of crisis that has taken a lot from me, it's kind of poetic that the problem which refocused and refueled me was called Energy Crisis. Thanks for watching and supporting our channel, and a special thank you to those of you who leave comments and thumbs up. It definitely motivates us to keep making more, so stay tuned for those in the future. Alright, take it easy. Peace.